I'm Jordan, 27, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to convince myself that my parents were just old-fashioned, not selfish. But over the years, it became painfully clear that they weren't just strict or traditional. They were entitled in a way that made me feel like a resource, not a person. I was the responsible one, the good kid who worked hard, never talked back, and always came through when someone else messed up. Somewhere along the line, that became my whole identity in the family. The fixer, the ATM, the peacekeeper. I used to think being generous was a virtue. Now I see how easily kindness gets mistaken for weakness when the people around you are willing to take advantage of it. My dad, Martin, is one of those men who believes respect should flow only one way. He worked a lot when I was younger, and when he was home, it felt like the house was filled with his rules more than his presence. My mom, Diane, is the kind of woman who never disagrees with him out loud, but she has her own ways of controlling things, always wrapped in guilt and emotional manipulation. My younger sister, Lila, 23, learned early on how to play both of them to her advantage. She's their baby, as my mom loves to remind me, which apparently excuses her from being responsible for anything. I've been living on my own for about 4 years now, and I'm finally in a stable place financially. I worked my way up from an entry-level position in an accounting firm to a management role. I don't have a lavish life, but I'm comfortable. I have savings, a small apartment, and a car that's paid off. That sense of independence took years to build, and it's the one thing I'm truly proud of. Unfortunately, my parents treat that stability like a shared resource, something they can access whenever it suits them. The first time my mom asked to borrow money, it was for something small, groceries, she said, because she forgot her card. Then it was for a utility bill that was a few days late. Then, somehow, I was paying for car repairs, birthday dinners, and even my dad's new fishing gear. I didn't mind at first. They're my parents. They raised me, right? That's what I told myself. But every time I helped, the gratitude got smaller, and the expectation got bigger. It got to the point where if I ever said no, my mom would act like I'd personally betrayed her. "You're so cold lately," she'd say, shaking her head in disappointment. "You've changed, Jordan. We just need a little help. Family helps family." And every time, I'd cave. I told myself it wasn't worth the argument. I'd swipe my card, send the transfer, and move on. But it never really stopped. The most recent argument started a few weeks before my dad's birthday. He was turning 58, and Mom was planning a big surprise. Her words, not mine. I figured that meant a barbecue in the backyard or maybe a small dinner, but when she started talking about renting a hall, hiring a caterer, and buying him a special gift, my stomach dropped. One evening, she called me while I was cooking dinner. "Jordan, your dad's birthday is coming up," she said in that too-sweet tone she uses before asking for something. "I want it to be really special this year." "Sure," I said cautiously, stirring my pasta. "What are you thinking?" "Well, you know how hard your father works," she started, the same script she's used 100 times. "I thought it might be nice if we all chipped in and got him something meaningful. Something he's wanted for years." I sighed. "Like what?" She hesitated just long enough for me to know it wasn't going to be reasonable. "A Rolex." I nearly dropped my fork. "A Rolex? Mom, those cost thousands." "I know, sweetheart, but your dad's been through so much lately," she said quickly. "It would mean the world to him. And think about it. He's never really splurged on himself." I bit my tongue to stop myself from laughing. My dad's entire garage was filled with expensive tools, golf clubs, and electronics he'd bought on impulse. Meanwhile, I was still paying off my student loans. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "that's not really in my budget." Her tone shifted instantly, the sweetness fading. "Jordan, don't be selfish. Your father has done everything for you. It's his birthday, for goodness sake." And there it was, the word she always used when she wanted to guilt me. Selfish. I could practically feel my jaw tightening. I'm not being selfish. I just don't think buying a luxury watch is a good idea right now. "You make good money," she snapped. "What's the point of working so hard if you can't even do something nice for your dad once in a while?" I exhaled, trying not to get sucked into another argument. "Mom, I already got him something. I ordered a personalized watch case. It'll be here next week." Silence. Then a low, judgmental hum. Well, I guess that's thoughtful." The disappointment in her voice was almost theatrical. "I just wish you'd think a little bigger sometimes." That was the end of that conversation, or so I thought. 2 days later, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some paperwork I'd helped Lila with. I was only planning to stay for a few minutes, but as I walked into the kitchen, my mom was standing by the counter holding my wallet. My wallet? What are you doing? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked up, startled but not guilty. Oh, Jordan, don't be dramatic. I was just grabbing your card to make things easier. Easier for what? For your dad's birthday present, she said matter-of-factly. He's been eyeing a watch, and since you refused to get it yourself, I figured I'd take care of it before the price goes up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You took my card? She rolled her eyes like I was overreacting. It's not a big deal. You'll get paid next week. I'll transfer the money back eventually. Besides, it's for family. That word again, family. Always used as an excuse for whatever boundary they decided to cross. I reached for the card, but she pulled it back slightly, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Mom, give me my card, I said slowly. She huffed, but handed it over, muttering under her breath. You've really changed, Jordan. You used to have such a generous heart. I don't know what happened. I didn't respond. I just slid the card back into my wallet and left. I sat in my car for a while after that, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding. It wasn't just about the card, it was about everything. The constant taking, the guilt, the way they twisted kindness into obligation. That night, I called my bank and made some changes. I locked my card, transferred most of my funds to a different account, and added a new security feature, blocked users. It was a precaution I'd hoped I'd never need. A week passed quietly. Too quietly. Then, on the morning of my dad's birthday, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Your dad's so excited for his gift. Thank you for being part of this, sweetheart. I knew you'd come through. I frowned. I hadn't agreed to anything. My pulse quickened as I opened my banking app, and sure enough, there it was, a notification waiting at the top. Attempted transaction from a blocked user. Rolex Boutique. $8,475. I stared at the screen, a slow wave of disbelief and anger washing over me. I didn't even have to guess who it was. That was the exact moment everything changed between us. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't cave, I didn't apologize, and I definitely didn't stay quiet. And when my dad tried to call me later that night, furious that his birthday surprise hadn't gone as planned, I finally said something I'd been holding in for years. The call came in just as I was finishing dinner. My phone buzzed across the counter, and when I saw my dad's name flash on the screen, my stomach sank. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. But I knew he'd just keep calling, or worse, my mom would show up at my apartment pretending it was all a misunderstanding. So I picked up. Hey, Dad, I said cautiously. His voice was sharp, almost trembling with controlled anger. You think this is funny? I blinked, taken aback. What are you talking about? The watch, Jordan. The card declined. In front of everyone. Do you have any idea how that made me look? Oh, there it was. Not what happened, not why did you block it, but how it made me look. That summed up my father perfectly. Image was everything to him. I didn't authorize that purchase, I said evenly. You weren't supposed to use my card. Oh, don't play dumb, he snapped. Your mother told me you offered to pay for my gift. I was trying to make it easier on her. I laughed bitterly. She took my card out of my wallet without asking. That's not making it easier. That's stealing. Watch your tone, Jordan, he warned. That woman raised you. Show some respect. Respect goes both ways, I said, my voice trembling now, not from fear, but from years of pent-up frustration. You can't just take what's mine and expect me to smile about it. There was a pause. I could almost hear him grinding his teeth. Unbelievable. You're seriously going to ruin my birthday over a watch? No, Dad, I said quietly. You ruined your birthday the second you thought you were entitled to something that wasn't yours. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. Then, in a low, icy voice, he said, You've changed, son. You used to know your place. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, the words echoing in my head. Know your place. It wasn't the first time he'd said that to me. When I was 16 and wanted to study music instead of business, he said it. When I moved out at 22 instead of staying home to save money, he said it again. It was always his way of reminding me I was beneath him, that no matter how old I got, I was supposed to obey. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind replayed every moment, every little jab, Every time they'd made me feel small for standing up for myself. But this time, something in me had shifted. I wasn't going to let them guilt me again. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. No calls, no texts. I thought maybe they'd cooled off. I even started to feel relieved. Then Sunday rolled around. I'd been cleaning my apartment when my sister, Lila, showed up unannounced. She stood in my doorway with a fake smile, holding a gift bag. "Hey, big brother," she said sweetly, walking past me like she owned the place. "You busy?" I blinked. Kind of. What's up?" She set the bag on my counter and sighed dramatically. "Mom and Dad are upset. Really upset. You made Dad cry, Jordan." I almost laughed. My dad cry? He once grounded me for tearing the corner of a newspaper he hadn't even read yet. "I doubt that," I said flatly. "I'm serious," she insisted. "You embarrassed them in front of everyone. Mom told everyone at the party you paid for the gift. When Dad's card got declined, they thought you'd," she paused for effect, "humiliated him on purpose." I froze. "Wait, what do you mean everyone?" She shrugged. "A bunch of Dad's friends were there. People from work. Aunt Valerie. Even Grandpa." My stomach twisted. I hadn't even known they were throwing a full-on party. "And she told them I paid for it." "Yeah," Lila said, chewing her gum like she was delivering gossip instead of devastating news. "She said it was your thank you to Dad for everything he's done for you." I let out a low breath, rubbing my temples. "So now everyone thinks I humiliated him on purpose." "Pretty much." She smiled sympathetically, but there was something gleeful in her eyes. "You really should fix this, Jordan. Mom's been crying nonstop. She says you've become cruel." I looked at her, searching for some trace of empathy, but all I saw was amusement. "You came here to guilt-trip me too?" Her smile faltered. "I came because I care. You know, you've always had this attitude. Like you're better than the rest of us." That one stung. "What are you talking about? You moved out, got your fancy job, your nice apartment, and now suddenly you think you're too good for family. You used to help out without complaining." "I helped because I wanted to," I said sharply. "Not because it was my job." "Well, someone's got to help Mom and Dad. They've done everything for us." I stared at her, realizing she genuinely believed it. "They've done everything for you, Lila. Who do you think paid your car insurance last year? Or your tuition when you failed that semester?" Her face flushed. "That's different. I was struggling. And what do you think I was doing when I worked 2 jobs to pay my student loans while covering for you?" She crossed her arms, glaring at me. "You're so bitter, Jordan. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, you'd actually have a relationship with them." That was the last straw. I pointed at the door. "Get out." She looked shocked. "What?" I said, "Get out." My voice was calm, but the anger in it was unmistakable. "You don't get to come here and twist things around. I'm done being the family wallet." For a moment, she hesitated like she might argue, but something in my expression must have warned her off. She grabbed her bag, muttered something under her breath, and slammed the door behind her. After she left, I sat in silence, shaking. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Exhausted, really. It hit me how deep their manipulation ran. They'd even sent Lila as their messenger, knowing I'd always had a soft spot for her. That night, I got an email from my mom. The subject line read, "You've gone too far." It was long, dramatic, and filled with guilt-tripping. She accused me of turning cold, of forgetting where I came from, and said my father was heartbroken. She even mentioned how disappointed my late grandmother would be if she could see the kind of person I'd become. At the end, she wrote, "You might think you're teaching us a lesson, but family isn't something you outgrow, Jordan. You'll regret this when you're alone." I didn't reply, but what I didn't know was that things were about to get worse. Much worse. The next week, I got a call from my bank. The representative sounded uneasy. "Mr. Carson, we've noticed some suspicious activity on one of your accounts. Did you authorize multiple withdrawals of $500 from different locations over the weekend?" My stomach dropped. "No, definitely not." She explained that someone had attempted to withdraw from an old joint account I'd opened years ago with my mom. I'd forgotten it even existed. I'd used it briefly to help her with bills before moving out. Apparently, she'd never closed it. I asked for the security footage from the ATM, and when the bank emailed me a still image the next day, my heart stopped. It was my mother. She wasn't even trying to hide it, smiling, standing at the ATM, her hair perfectly styled, holding the card like she owned it. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I called her immediately. "Mom, I just got a call from the bank, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You've been taking money out of our old account. Oh, don't be ridiculous, she said quickly. It's not our money. It's family money. And I needed it to cover some expenses since you froze the other card. Family money? I repeated, stunned. That's my paycheck, Mom. You have no right to touch it. Her tone turned icy. Watch how you talk to me, Jordan. I didn't raise you to be so ungrateful. I felt something inside me snap. Ungrateful? You've been stealing from me. Do you even hear yourself? You think you're better than us now, she hissed. Ever since you got that promotion, you've been acting like we're beneath you. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for your father and me. Yeah, I said, my voice shaking with rage. And I wouldn't have a single dollar left if I kept letting you use me. There was a long silence. Then she said quietly, You're making a mistake, Jordan. Family always finds out who betrays them. She hung up. I just sat there, staring at the wall, her words echoing in my head. Family always finds out who betrays them. By the end of that week, the fallout had started. My aunt called to tell me I should apologize before things go too far. My dad left a voicemail saying I was cut off from the family. Lila blocked me on social media, then posted a story captioned, Money changes people. I thought that was the end of it. Until the next weekend, when I came home to find an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was a handwritten note from my mom, neatly folded, and a small key. The note said, If you won't be part of this family anymore, we'll take back what's ours. You'll understand soon. And that's when I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. After that note, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I locked my door, drew the blinds, and just sat on the couch for hours. I kept turning the key in my hand, the one my mom had slipped under the door, as if it carried some secret threat. The words, We'll take back what's ours, played on loop in my head. Every time I tried to eat, I couldn't. Every time I tried to sleep, my mind ran through scenarios of them showing up at my apartment, at my office, at my friends' houses, anywhere to remind me that I was supposedly betraying them. I realized something that night. They weren't just entitled. They were strategic. Every interaction, every guilt trip, every small victory I thought I had. They'd planned it to make me feel powerless. I felt like a puppet I'd believed I controlled. And the worst part? I had let them get this far. I had given them every opportunity to cross boundaries, and I'd always said yes. Always. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. Not quietly, not in whispers, but full-on, messy, exhausted crying. The kind where your chest aches, your throat burns, and your eyes sting so badly you can barely open them. It felt like shedding years of pent-up frustration, disappointment, and anger all at once. The next morning, I didn't want to move. My apartment felt too small, too enclosed, too familiar with the sound of their voices in my head. But I had bills to pay, a job to go to, responsibilities that didn't vanish because my family had decided to manipulate me. So I got up, made a black coffee, and forced myself to think about the day ahead. At work, I threw myself into spreadsheets, reports, and meetings like I'd never done before. I wasn't trying to escape. They were always in my head. But I was trying to reclaim something that felt lost. Control. I noticed small things about myself that had faded over time. The meticulousness in my work, the strategic thinking I'd honed over years of juggling responsibilities and appeasing my parents, and the quiet patience I developed when nothing seemed fair. Those qualities had always existed, but under the weight of guilt and manipulation, they had been buried. I started using that patience and strategy to rebuild my financial independence. I opened new accounts under my name only, invested a portion of my savings, and even sought out a financial advisor who could help me navigate investments I'd always ignored while bailing out family members. Slowly, I began to feel a sense of relief, a sense of ownership over my own life. But it wasn't just about money. I realized I needed boundaries in every aspect of my life. I deleted my parents' contact from my phone, blocked their emails, and unfollowed them on social media. I didn't want to see posts, guilt trips, or passive-aggressive messages disguised as photos of family dinners. I didn't respond to calls, texts, or even DMs. For the first time in my life, I prioritized my own well-being. The hardest part was explaining it to people outside my family. Friends and coworkers noticed the tension in my demeanor and my absence at family gatherings. Some asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. Are you okay? One coworker asked over lunch. Your parents not making life easy again? I just nodded, smiled weakly, and let the conversation die. I wasn't ready to let anyone else in. This was mine to fix, mine to process, and mine to recover from. During this time, I also started seeing a therapist. I had avoided therapy for years, thinking it was unnecessary. But now, sitting with someone who didn't take sides, who didn't sugarcoat things, who didn't expect me to obey or justify my feelings, I finally began untangling the emotional knots my family had tied in me. I cried in front of them sometimes, and it wasn't shameful, it was cathartic. For the first time, I could call the manipulation what it was, emotional abuse. I could name the guilt trips for what they were, coercion. And I could admit to myself that the resentment I felt wasn't spite. It was a natural reaction to being taken advantage of for decades. Meanwhile, at work, things started to shift too. I was no longer just completing my tasks. I was innovating, strategizing, and pushing for promotions I had always shied away from. I didn't want anyone to help me anymore, especially not my family. I wanted to prove to myself that I could stand on my own feet. Within months, I was offered a senior management role that tripled my previous salary. I could hardly believe it. The promotion didn't just change my bank account, it changed my confidence. For the first time, I truly felt like I was capable of protecting my own life from those who would manipulate me. It was around this time I discovered an unexpected sense of peace in small victories. A few months after blocking my parents, I walked past a cafe near work and realized I could buy my own coffee without guilt. I could spend a weekend on a small vacation without worrying about some family emergency that didn't involve me. I could decide how I wanted to live my life, and nobody had the right to dictate it. Even so, the past wasn't done with me. One Friday evening, I came home to find a package at my door. No return address, nothing on the label except my name in my mother's handwriting. My heart raced as I carefully opened it. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook with a note. "Jordan, we see you are trying to build your own life. But remember, everything we've given you, every opportunity, every chance, is still part of us. Don't forget who made you." I stared at it for a long time. My hands shook. It wasn't money or a stolen card or an attempted purchase this time. It was manipulation in its purest form, a psychological reminder that they could still reach me. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about reclaiming finances or physical independence. It was about psychological emancipation. I began to take steps to reclaim not just my money, but my mind, my thoughts, and my autonomy. I blocked the notebook mentally as best I could, put it in a drawer, and went for a run. I started journaling, meditating, even learning to cook meals just for myself. Every small act of self-care became an act of rebellion. Slowly, I began to network with other professionals in my field, building connections that weren't influenced by my family or their reputation. I invested in my skills, attended seminars, and started considering new business ventures I'd always dreamed about, but never dared to pursue because they might have asked for a cut or claimed a stake. Months passed. My relationship with my family was non-existent. They sent messages, emails, and gifts that I refused to acknowledge. My father called twice, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. My mother sent flowers to my apartment with no note. Lila tried once to text me about family reconciliation, but I blocked her immediately. Each interaction they attempted to force reminded me of their entitlement, their disregard for my boundaries, and my past complicity in letting them control me. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, I noticed a strange shift within myself. The fear and resentment that had dominated my life were slowly being replaced by clarity. I understood my worth now in a way I never had before. I understood that their love had always been conditional, measured by my compliance, my financial contributions, and my willingness to let them dictate my life. And I understood that I didn't need that kind of love to thrive. Then, one evening, I received an email from a client who had been impressed by a presentation I'd given. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership, something that could lead to a major breakthrough in my career. I read the email twice, heart pounding. This was my chance, my opportunity to truly step into a life I'd been too afraid to fully claim before. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. My parents' machinations had pushed me to rock bottom, but it had forced me to discover something I'd long forgotten: resilience. I had been broken by their entitlement and manipulation, yes, but in the breaking, I'd found the strength to rebuild stronger than ever. And just as I was beginning to feel the taste of victory, the first real spark of fear crept back in. Because while I was busy rebuilding my life, they were plotting their next move. By the time I realized what was happening, I had fully embraced my independence. My salary had tripled, my investments were growing steadily, and my professional network was thriving. Every day, I could feel myself standing taller, not just financially, but emotionally. I wasn't the scared, pliable child anymore. I was Jordan, 27, and finally in control of my own life. Yet, in the quiet moments, I couldn't shake the thought that my parents were still out there, waiting for an opening, scheming in their usual fashion. It wasn't just a lingering paranoia, it was logical. My mom had tried to steal from me, manipulate me, and guilt me into doing whatever she wanted. My dad had used intimidation and the weight of his ego to control me for years. And Lila had been the weaponized sibling, a perfect blend of charm and cruelty, ready to relay their messages and manipulate situations to their advantage. I'd spent too long reacting to their moves. Now, I wanted to take the first step in regaining not just my independence, but my dignity, and maybe even a little payback. The first step was research. I started keeping detailed records of every incident over the last 5 years. Withdrawals they'd made without my permission, emotional manipulations, guilt trips, every interaction where I'd been gaslit into feeling like the bad person for asserting boundaries. I documented dates, amounts, messages, voicemails, and screenshots. It wasn't just for insurance in case things got ugly financially. It was for myself. I wanted to see clearly what had been done to me, without the haze of guilt or self-doubt. I also began subtly testing their patterns. My parents were predictable in ways they didn't realize. Mom always reached out when there was a financial need, usually disguised under emotional pleas. Dad always escalated when pride or image was involved, exaggerating slights and twisting situations to make me look ungrateful. And Lila was eager to step in whenever there was a conflict, as long as it painted her as the innocent bystander. Understanding these patterns was crucial. I needed to anticipate every move before they made it, and maybe even manipulate the board in my favor. Then came the perfect opportunity. My dad's birthday, ironically the same day everything had started spiraling months ago, was approaching again. But this time, I was no longer the passive participant. I had a plan brewing. I wasn't going to engage directly. I didn't need to. Instead, I was going to use their own greed, pride, and assumptions against them. I started by creating a separate account at a different bank, entirely untraceable by them. The old joint accounts were frozen, the cards shredded, and every possible link removed. I also updated all my digital accounts, emails, and phone numbers associated with money transfers and alerts. Every line of defense was reinforced, ensuring that when the moment came, I would remain untouchable. Next, I began gathering allies. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues and friends who had been in similar situations or who were simply savvy with finance and law. I didn't reveal the full extent of my plan, only enough to get advice on logistics, how to protect assets, how to respond legally to unauthorized attempts at withdrawal, and how to set up triggers that would notify me immediately if any of my family tried to overstep. These conversations were private, discreet, and strategic. I realized that part of my advantage wasn't just my own preparation, but the support network I had now cultivated independently of my family's influence. Meanwhile, I started letting subtle rumors percolate in my family's circle. Not lies, exactly, but little hints that I had made significant changes in my life, some of which involved them. Lila, being nosy, was easy to manipulate without realizing it. A carefully timed Instagram post here, a casual mention to a mutual cousin there, all hinting at financial success, independence, and boundaries they could no longer breach. I wanted to watch how quickly the anxiety would seep in on their side, to measure their reaction times and vulnerability. I also worked on the emotional groundwork. I knew that revenge, if done poorly, could look petty. I wanted it to be measured, calculated, and undeniable. I began imagining the scenarios. Their faces when a planned move failed spectacularly, the confusion when they realized their assumptions about me were no longer accurate, and the complete collapse of their control over me. I wasn't motivated by cruelty. I was motivated by justice, by reclaiming the narrative of my own life. Then came the final layer, patience. I had learned over years of dealing with entitled family members that hasty moves never worked. They thrived on impulsive reactions and chaos. To beat them at their own game, I had to be calm, deliberate, and almost invisible. Every message I sent, every call I ignored, every transaction I blocked, it was part of conditioning them to expect patterns they couldn't predict anymore. They would underestimate me, and underestimation was the most powerful weapon I had. The first concrete step involved a carefully crafted bait. I knew my dad couldn't resist a high-ticket item he desired: luxury, prestige, recognition. I also knew my mother's tactics. She would always find a way to borrow from me, to make it seem like it was for someone else, to hide her own intentions behind generosity or familial obligation. Lila would be the first to report any changes to them, innocently or not, and they would act before verifying facts. This predictability was the key. I created a small, discreet account with minimal funds, one that appeared linked to my main accounts but wasn't. Then I added a series of alerts. Any attempted transaction, withdrawal, or even small test charges would send me instant notifications. I left subtle trails that suggested I was still using my main account in predictable ways, even when I wasn't. My parents' patterns suggested they would try to access it before my birthday, just like last year. I only needed them to take the bait. In parallel, I refined my personal narrative. I started documenting everything in a private, encrypted digital journal, noting their behaviors, my reactions, and every step I took. It served two purposes: keeping my plan organized and reinforcing my mental clarity. I could visualize the eventual outcome, the way each domino would fall, while staying detached from the temptation to act prematurely. At work, I leveraged every opportunity to expand influence. I positioned myself for a new project that would eventually give me direct control over contracts and accounts I'd only observed before. This wasn't just about financial security. It was about authority and the ability to execute a plan without interference. Every presentation, every meeting, every network opportunity became part of a long game I was playing. Even socially, I was strategic. Friends were included in the periphery of my plan, casually mentioning my new investments or financial changes, enough to ensure that if my parents were listening through any social channels, they'd think I was still accessible and potentially vulnerable. I was shaping their perception, and it was intoxicating to see how their own assumptions about my compliance were turning against them without me lifting a finger. But the most crucial element was timing. I decided that the perfect moment to act would be the week of my father's birthday. Not the day itself, not before. Too much risk if I acted too early, too much wasted drama if I acted too late. I wanted the full force of anticipation, expectation, and entitlement to hit them at once, only to collapse spectacularly. By the time they realized what had happened, there would be no way to recover, and I would finally have the satisfaction of seeing years of manipulation and entitlement face consequences. Even Lila's role became part of the setup. She was predictable, eager to intervene, and desperate to stay on Mom and Dad's good side. I left just enough breadcrumbs to ensure she would report back on my supposed softness and compliance, setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation. By feeding into her assumptions, I turned her into an unintentional accomplice. By the time the week arrived, I was calm, collected, and ready. My accounts were secure, my alerts active, my plan invisible to anyone but me. I had rehearsed every possible scenario in my head, accounting for emotional outbursts, guilt trips, and desperate maneuvers. I felt invincible in a way I never had before. Years of being belittled, used, and manipulated had forged me into someone patient, strategic, and fiercely independent. And yet, even with all this preparation, I felt a thrill of nervous anticipation. Revenge was one thing, perfection was another. The first move would set everything in motion, and I couldn't afford mistakes. I kept checking my alerts, double-checking my accounts, making sure every piece of the plan was in place. The moment finally came on a quiet Wednesday evening. I had just finished a late dinner, and the apartment was silent except for the soft hum of my laptop. A small ping drew my attention, an attempted transaction notification. I smiled, the first true, unguarded smile I'd had in months. The game had begun. The ping from my phone wasn't just a sound. It was the opening move, The first domino in a chain reaction I'd spent months carefully planning. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't quicken beyond the normal thrill of anticipation. I simply stared at the notification. Attempted transaction from a blocked user. $8,475. Rolex Boutique. I allowed myself a slow, deliberate smile. I knew exactly who it was. I had anticipated this. Mom couldn't resist the thrill of using what she thought was my money to get what she wanted. Dad, of course, was eager to indulge, too proud to check the details, too wrapped up in his image to consider that the gift might come with consequences. And Lila? Predictable as ever, she would swoop in to report back with exaggerated urgency, ensuring maximum panic on their side. I sat back, opened my laptop, and accessed the security logs I'd been quietly monitoring. Every card swipe, every attempted withdrawal, every tiny digital footprint they left in their desperation had been collected. Mom's signature on the ATM slip from 2 months ago. Dad's email requesting my account details for ease of purchase. Screenshots of Lila posting passive-aggressive comments online, designed to guilt me into compliance. Every piece of evidence I needed to execute my revenge was there, and it all pointed to one undeniable truth. They had overstepped for the last time. Step 1 was to ensure the attempted theft failed. I confirmed the blocked user alert and made sure the boutique was notified that the cardholder did not authorize the purchase. I then sent a polite, professional note to the store manager detailing the situation, emphasizing that any further attempts would be fraudulent. This wasn't just about preventing the purchase. It was about creating a paper trail, a visible record that would make any claims of misunderstanding impossible. Next, I deployed what I like to call the psychological component of my plan. I quietly called my extended family, cousins, aunts, and uncles, those who were loosely connected but whose influence still mattered in the family hierarchy. I didn't share specifics, only enough to imply that my parents had been attempting to access my accounts without permission. Just keep an eye on things, I told them casually. I wouldn't want anyone to be caught off guard. By the end of the day, whispers had spread. My parents began to realize, too late, that their network of manipulation had begun to unravel. I also leveraged Lila's predictability. She had posted a story on Instagram the night before, hinting that I was finally softening and might contribute to Dad's birthday gift after all. I used this against her. I left her a single, cryptic text. Check your assumptions. That was all. Within hours, I could see her panic online. The emojis, the subtle, anxious posts, and the abrupt disappearing of previous stories. She didn't know it, but she had walked right into the trap. The next day, my dad called me multiple times. His voice was urgent, almost frantic. He didn't understand that I had anticipated every word he might say. When I finally picked up, I kept my tone calm, measured, and almost bored. "Dad," I said evenly, "the attempted transaction didn't go through." "What do you mean it didn't go through?" he barked. "I tried to buy the watch. Everyone was expecting it." "Your card was blocked, Dad," I replied. "I received a notification immediately. I've also documented the attempt. Any further action would be considered fraud." There was a long pause on the other end. I could almost hear him digesting the reality of the situation. "Jordan, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about boundaries," I said simply. "Something you've never respected. Something you will respect from now on." Mom, of course, had gotten involved by this point. I could hear her in the background, her voice dripping with accusation. "Jordan, this isn't how family works. You're being cruel." "Family works both ways," I said. "And a gift shouldn't come at the expense of someone else's security, privacy, or trust." I could almost feel the tension crackle through the phone. Every expectation, every assumption they'd made about me had been invalidated in one calm conversation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't beg for apologies. I simply stated the facts, and they realized too late that they'd walked into the consequences of their own choices. The fallout was immediate. My dad attempted to call again, but I ignored him. Mom sent another series of emails, escalating in desperation, none of which changed the fact that their access was blocked, their pride bruised, and their plans foiled. Lila posted another cryptic story about family disappointment, but without any access to my accounts or influence over me, her attempts to manipulate were powerless. Then came the most satisfying moment. I reached out to my bank and confirmed everything in writing. The attempted withdrawals, the blocks, the notifications, the unauthorized card use. I now had undeniable proof that my parents had tried to bypass my boundaries. I forwarded this information to a lawyer specializing in family disputes and asset protection, just in case they escalated further. I didn't want them to touch my money or even think they could. I was fully untouchable. I also made a deliberate choice regarding my extended family. A carefully worded group message was sent, thanking them for their concern and clarifying that all future requests for money or gifts needed to go through proper channels. I didn't call them out by name, yet everyone understood the message. My parents were isolated, their web of influence weakening every minute. As the week progressed, I began noticing subtle cracks in their behavior. Dad stopped calling entirely, retreating into silence that was more telling than any argument. Mom attempted to send gifts, all of which were politely returned unopened. Lila's stories became sparse and awkward, her social media presence now tinged with anxiety. Even casual relatives who had been indirectly feeding into their entitlement began to distance themselves, unsure of how to navigate the fallout. By the time my dad's actual birthday arrived, the situation had reached its apex. They had expected me to cave, to apologize, to somehow make them feel validated despite their transgressions. Instead, they were left with nothing but the realization that I had outmaneuvered them completely. They could scream, plead, manipulate, and threaten, but I was calm, secure, and untouchable. That morning, I received a single, final email from my mom. It was short, clipped, almost formal. We need to talk. You've changed. This isn't acceptable. I stared at it, then deleted it without hesitation. For the first time in years, I wasn't just free of their manipulation. I felt untouchable, empowered in a way that went beyond money or strategy. My independence wasn't just financial. It was emotional, psychological, and utterly complete. I spent the rest of the day doing exactly what I wanted. I cooked myself a proper breakfast, worked on a personal project I'd been putting off, and took a long walk without the nagging weight of their expectations. The sense of liberation was intoxicating. Weeks later, I learned that Dad had attempted to talk to some of our extended family to clarify the situation. Every attempt backfired because my documentation was airtight. Mom tried to explain the situation on social media subtly, but the narrative had shifted and nobody was taking her side. Lila, desperate for validation, even reached out to apologize, her message tinged with panic that her side had failed spectacularly. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The power balance had irrevocably shifted. By the end of that month, I had fully reconstructed my life. I had financial security, emotional boundaries, a professional network that supported me, and a personal sense of dignity that could not be challenged by entitled parents or a manipulative sibling. I had transformed years of frustration, betrayal, and manipulation into a careful, calculated triumph. The final touch came one evening as I sat in my apartment, looking out at the city skyline. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a spam notification I'd missed. Nothing from them. Silence. The kind of silence that wasn't waiting to ambush me, but rather acknowledged that the game was over. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and allowed myself to savor it. The calm, the clarity, the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've played the long game and won. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just Jordan the obedient child, the ATM, or the peacemaker. I was Jordan, the architect of my own life, untouchable and finally free. And somewhere deep inside, I smiled at the thought that they would never see me the same way again, because the child they tried to control had finally grown into a force they could never manipulate. It was over.